Thank you so much for joining our webinar this afternoon with Niva Miles, who's going to be focusing on human and social biology for CSEC examinations. And she's going to be focusing on her very own title, with the opportunity to answer some questions that you may have as well towards the end of the session. As always, if you'd like to say anything or write anything, please feel free to write this in the chat box and we will do our best to answer your questions. I'll pass it over to Niva now. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's actually afternoon here and it's a beautiful day in Wales, so I hope you're having sunshine, as you probably are in the Caribbean as well. Welcome to our meet and greet, and would you believe it, but actually today I received my advance copy of the book. Here it is, and as you can imagine, after 9 months of writing and so on, it's like giving birth to a new child. So I'm really proud of that, and I'm delighted to be able to talk to you about the book and the syllabus. Just so that you will be able to recognise it, here's the actual front cover of the book. And as you can see, of course, it's the 7th edition. And I was very privileged to be invited as a recognised author and as a senior examiner for one of the main exam boards to actually rewrite the 6th edition of Phil Gadd's popular book to bring it into line with the new syllabus. So now we have the 7th edition. So why did we actually need a new edition? Well, as I'm sure as you appreciate, the syllabus has actually changed. A few topics have been added, quite a few have also been deleted, and the order of the topics has changed. So it was necessary to actually rewrite the book and bring it into the same order in most instances as the syllabus. It's much easier then for you to follow the topics as the syllabus is set out, but of course you may want to teach it in your own particular order. The addition of the school-based assessment is worth 20% of the total mark, and we felt that really this should be very well supported throughout the book. And as we work through some of the features, I think you'll appreciate what we've tried to do here. We've listened to teachers. They've wanted new features, and they also, many teachers asked for a glossary, which we've included. And they wanted the syllabus to actually be put into a real world context so that learners, students could actually appreciate why they were learning some of the topics. One of the problems, as I understand it, is there's a shortage of equipment and teaching time for human and social biology. And so what we've done, we've reorganized the activities, redesigned some of them to offer more opportunities for independent learning. But we've also kept the essential practical activities which you would have found in 6E, although sometimes we've actually tried to use more everyday equipment for that. At the start of the book, students are actually advised to read how to actually use it. And this will form the basis of my presentation, because it actually shows you the various features which we've incorporated and which I'm actually very excited about. At the beginning of every chapter, you'll see that the objectives are written out as they were in previous editions, but we were asked if we could actually rewrite some of these objectives into sort of student-friendly language. So maybe if they read these alongside any syllabuses that you might print out for them, they understand some of the more academic terms that are in the syllabus much better. So every chapter has that at the beginning. And then the text is very, very similar. We've tried to change the language where it seemed to be very academic and maybe at too high a level for some of these learners. And so we've modified the language to some extent. And we've moved the keywords from the margins, which were filled with keywords before, and we've highlighted the new words in blue in the text. I think this makes them stand out better, and when learners come back to look at the text, if they're trying to find definitions, they find them much quicker. It also meant that it freed the margin up for all the various new features that we were aiming to put in, of course. The glossary will have all the words in it that were highlighted in blue in the text. But what we've done is not give very full definitions of each word in the glossary, not as full as they would find them obviously in the main text, because if we did that, it would be almost doubling the size of the book at the end, if you can imagine. So what we've done, we've given the key points of the definition and suggested that learners look also in the index and look for the main place where they can find that word, and then look for a more detailed explanation of its meaning if necessary. But the glossary is definitely there as a nice prompt to help them to remember the meanings of these words. Everyone likes the large diagrams. There are a lot of very good diagrams in the original text, and so we kept most of those. Occasionally, we've been able to add extra labels. So, for example, this diagram of the female reproductive system, we've put a few annotations on there, which will help learners save them perhaps reading the full text when they're revising. They can look at the diagram. We haven't done this for everyone because it would have just been too busy, if you like, and fill the page with text again, which isn't necessarily very learner friendly. Every diagram is well indexed so that when they're looking at the diagram, there's obviously the caption at the bottom and the figure number. And every diagram is referenced in the text using the figure number so that they know which part of the text it actually refers to. We've updated the activities and inserted a lot more, actually. So we've tried to make them relevant to these particular students. Here's one particular activity using the local observatory so that they understand about monitoring carbon dioxide levels in the chapters on climate change and so on. And it makes it much more relevant to them. And one of the things that some teachers have told us was that actually when they're doing graphs, etc., they need to understand trends and be able to describe them. So in some of the activities and some of the project skills you'll see later, and even the questions at the end, we've tried to introduce the idea of describing a trend. And here's a very simple one, as you can see, a simple trend from January 79, well, actually from 1958 to February 2020. The activities include a whole range of learning styles. This one suggests that they have a discussion maybe, or that they could make a poster. They might want to illustrate, in this case, the greenhouse effect or the impact of global warming on humans. And we've tried to incorporate a large range of activities in the various chapters where it's appropriate, of course. And we hope that it'll cover most learning styles for most learners. And it might give some different ideas on how they could learn. So those that just read everything and highlight the key words might actually think about, what if I do drawings instead? Or what if I actually practice an experiment, that sort of thing. One of the problems we've been advised on is that, in fact, very often people who learn HSB have to do it in a classroom and don't always have access to good lab equipment. I know this doesn't apply to everybody, but where it does, we've tried to look for perhaps some everyday equipment. It doesn't always happen, but I'm sure you'll have your own ideas on that as well. But here's an example using a model nephron, where they can even do this at home, just using a sieve and a bowl and a jar of the various bits and pieces to represent the blood. And the idea in this particular one was you pour the contents through a sieve and you realize that large things stay behind, i.e. they're not filtered in the nephron, and everything else goes through. And this was the starting point for an activity which follows on with lots of questions, which I haven't included here. And equally, some of the activities which are in the syllabus, and it's not an option that they know them. They have to know them, so they have them for their theory. We've tried to incorporate not only the actual test, as in this case, a bioret test in food, but also to give the result, so that if they don't have access readily to other facilities, then they can see what the result would look like. And this has been a feature that some teachers have asked us for. You'll notice that for this particular one, we've said, okay, there's an optional activity. If you can't do this in class, or you miss the lesson maybe, you can choose a video about the bioret test, and that means obviously that you can watch it online, and then you can answer any questions associated with it. All the activities are given a search term where it's appropriate. So in this case, if the search term is bioret test, that will help the learner to get straight to the right sorts of videos, YouTube and so on. We've avoided giving actual links because these can change very often, or they disappear, and there's nothing more frustrating than trying a link and it's not actually available anymore, or maybe not in your region. So we've kept the idea of using a search term for all our activities, as you can see. One of the features that teachers like are the in-text questions. What they didn't like was having all the answers at the back, because they argued that actually a lot of their learners would cheat, and rather than actually try out the questions properly, they'd look at the answers and they wouldn't therefore really learn anything new. So what we've done, we've graded the questions. We've taken out the little green questions, which were in the 6th edition, and we've combined all of those with the old in-text questions and written lots of new ones. And in this case now, we've called them all in-text questions, but we've graded them from through these 4 levels, as you can see. So the simplest questions are the ones designated blue. So it might be something very simple, like name for 4 places where cartilage is found in the skeleton. So it's total recall, and they can get that by reading the text carefully. Level 2, they're expected to apply a little bit of knowledge. So they're very often, they're going to start with explain. So they'll not only know what a ligament is or what a tendon is, but they should understand why ligaments are slightly elastic in this case, but tendons are not elastic. So they're applying some of their knowledge. By level 3, we want more detailed reasoning and explanation. And some of these are slightly longer too. As you can see, the answers are longer. So although they're in-text questions, some of them would actually be very good for homework questions because they're expecting a little bit more detail. So this one is from an earlier, well, actually it's from chapter 17. So we're talking about the final chapter on the environment. And this one is about eutrophication and why do fish die in affected water. So they can largely get that from the text that they're reading, because that's eutrophication is described. And then why do fish die? They will probably be able to work that out too from the text. But by level 4, and there are not many of these throughout the book, but I would say a lot of level 4 type answers are in the paper 02 style questions that we've got at the end of chapters. But here we want a little bit of more thinking, applying what they know to the real world. So it's a less familiar situation. So you can see how the level 3 question about eutrophication could lead on to the one about the farmer finding his stream actually runs through land and the stream is choked with water plants. So how could he actually solve that problem? So you can see they have to actually apply their knowledge to that one. There are several new features, and the real world features are designed to apply the topics to a Caribbean context, and hopefully ones that Caribbean teenagers will actually relate to. The idea is to try and engage the students with the world beyond the classroom, and it helps them better to understand and apply the topics to practical real-world situations. It also helps them to see that what they're learning is actually relevant and needed. As you can see here, the feature includes careers in the biological sciences, current issues, links to other subjects, and Caribbean heroes and heroines. Our first example of that is a real world issue. One of the key points I think that seems to come up again and again through the syllabus is that there is a problem of childhood obesity in the Caribbean. And of course, that leads to problems with adult obesity as well. And so we've tried to bring it in where we can without being, I'm not sure what the word is, we don't want to frighten them about it, but we do want to highlight the problems. So in this particular real world issue, we've drawn attention to the fact that there is actually an action plan in the Caribbean, and that different regions have their own action plans. And in this one, we've highlighted the fact that actually 1 in every 3 child in the Caribbean is overweight or obese. And the figure post 2017 was still growing. So it is an important issue. And we've referred to the fact that there are scorecards in the Healthy Caribbean areas. So if you search the term Healthy Caribbean Obesity Fact Sheet, you're probably familiar with these, that the young person can actually look up their particular region, find out what some of the measures are taking place there and what measures are due to come in. Of course, these are up to date as up to about 2020, so there may well be changes you can draw their attention to. We've linked, where possible, the subject to other subjects. And here we've got sporting injuries, which isn't actually part of the syllabus, but links it to those who are doing PE, for them to have an understanding of what sporting injuries are called and which parts of the skeleton in this case, and the bones and the muscles, bones and ligaments, what they're referring to and how it actually applies to their other subjects. And alongside this particular one, I've suggested careers that include muscles and bones. Some of them are quite aspirational, I would think, for some of the HSB students, but there are students who are doing this as an extra science and who could well be motivated to think about other professions when they go on to further study. And it might actually encourage some of the HSB students to think, well, if I do another subject later on, maybe I could try one of these professions. So they are quite aspirational. Other ones that we've included obviously include things like nutrition and dietitians and those sorts of careers. And then we move to the future. The last chapter in edition 6 has gone because a lot of that is now current as opposed to the future. But where there were still future innovations, we've included some of those and added some new ones. There are lots of interesting innovations and obviously possible inventions to show learners where the biological science can actually contribute to the future health and well-being of themselves and mankind overall. So here are just 2 of them. When we talked about cells, there's a future reference to stem cells so that they can understand the significance of learning about cells. I think a lot of people these days, having had a year of COVID, are now experts in epidemiology and virology and all sorts of ologies which they had never even considered before. And I think some of these learners will realise that actually what they're doing is very relevant to the modern day. And where possible, we've included references again to the Caribbean. So we've got tackling climate change in this case. And we've mentioned regions in the Caribbean wherever possible, so that anyone living in a particular region will find something linked to their region. Obviously not every time, but where it's relevant we have. So for example, when we're doing food webs and so on, we've used local food webs rather than just general ones. You can see here Build Better Jamaica's objectives and linked to CARICOM, and how important the recommendations from Jamaica and so on are to the rest of the world. Interestingly, the Caribbean is more affected by other people's inability to reduce their carbon footprint, and it affects the Caribbean in quite a bad way. Even though you may not be producing all your own carbon dioxide emissions, you are affected by other people. So we made that point as well in the text. There are other future ones. We've talked about new prosthetics. There's some very interesting innovations there. Male contraceptive pill, which was quite a new thing to talk about and may create some discussion. And to be positive about climate change, we've included, could green algae save the planet? And there's a reference to algal bioreactors, which are controlled by artificial intelligence, all modern, all new, and having a positive way, perhaps, of reducing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere without damaging the rest of the planet. So those are some of the future items. At the end of every chapter, instead of the long bulleted points that we've had previously, students have said that they don't really like those, and that they can't learn them very easily. And so because they're not user-friendly, we thought, well, how can we change that? And we came up with the new revision maps, which are designed to include all the prompts to the main points in the text, and it will link them where possible. So here's one example from Transport in Cells. You can see how we've got the main heading, Transport in Cells, linked it to active transport and passive transport and so on. And then each key point to remind them of what's in the text for that particular topic. And in places in the activities, we've also encouraged learners to design their own revision maps, which we've called mind maps, so that they can see the links between things, which obviously helps them to learn, and also triggers their memory when they're in an exam situation. They need to think, well, what's linked to what, and maybe they can picture a revision map much more easily than a list of bulleted points. So I'm quite pleased with these. And as a consequence of including these, we've taken out the concept maps at the front of the chapter, which was in chapter 6th edition rather, because they, in a way, they were similar, and everything became rather repetitive. I haven't included all the examples of tables and so on. We had some very good tables in the 6th edition, both summary tables and tables of information for things like vitamins and minerals, let's say. We have other summary tables at the end of a chapter to, again, pinpoint the various chapter ideas. And I think, again, that will help different students to learn the particular topic. So they've got lots of opportunities to use a method that suits them. And they're those tables are very similar, so I haven't included them here. After the revision maps, we have the multi-choice questions. In most chapters, there are 16. And you can see here, I've just given you one small example. This is in a chapter on the types of disease. So they've got a bar chart, There are a few of these actually in the book in this sort of style. And they're asked us to read that chart and to link the data, obviously, to the multi-choice question. Others will include images such as blood cells and so on, or cells, all sorts of images. But generally, most of them, I would say, are just text. And of course, if you count it up overall, there's going to be over 270 multi-choice questions for you to choose from if you want to actually put together a test. The end of chapter paper 2 style exam questions have been changed completely. We've more closely aligned them to the written papers, as you can see here. All of them are 15 marks long, as in the actual exam, and they're set out in a similar sort of way. As you can see, some of them, again, will have graphs. This particular one, I picked it because it was a relatively short one, which showed some of the features rather than being a particularly typical question. But it does have the question broken down into various stages, as you can see. It's actually asking about a practical example of how can you actually find out if you move the light, what happens to the rate of photosynthesis. Again, we're giving results. We're asking them to look at the results, describe any trends that they see, and other applications, as you can see at the end. Now, the 15 markers are all broken down into the mark scheme. And the mark scheme is the one that the exam board provide for showing you how to actually mark a particular question. Obviously, the actual expectation, the ideas that you're expecting them to put in. And then a column illustrating, the first column is headed knowledge, which is, in this case, the first three answers, first 3 marks are knowledge. Most of the next part is knowledge, but it is applying the knowledge. And then the second column at the right hand side there is about understanding. So you can see there are a couple of marks there for the understanding, and that helps not only you but the learner to know, well, okay, the knowledge parts are quite straightforward, but understanding and applying the knowledge is more difficult, and they get some idea of which parts of the question are the hard bits, if you like. As I said earlier, the answers to the Intext questions are all online, and that was, again, what teachers asked us. And also the multi-choice questions are not given, the answers are not given at the back of the book as they were previously, again, so that teachers can use them as tests without worrying that people have swatted up the answers beforehand. And so what we've done, we've provided all the answers for both style of questions and the in-text questions, and we've put them online. And these will be available to you. And you can decide whether or not you give your students access to the multi-choice answers, if you want them to mark themselves, or if you do the marking and or maybe read out the answers in class after they've done the test. Also, the activities have got lots of questions in them, and where appropriate, we've written the answers as, well, suggested answers, because obviously there's going to be a variety of answers to some of them, but where possible, we've given suggested answers, which will help you, I think, to save time trying to work out mark schemes for yourselves. And as I said, it'll be up to you to decide how you actually share the answers with your students. Now, one of the most important things, I think, in the new syllabus is the addition of the school-based assessment, the SBA. And so what we've done, we've looked at what's required in the SBA, And we've realised that being 20%, you should give at least 20% of your time to actually preparing for it, rewriting them, and so on. And so we've got a whole chapter, and it is chapter 18, explaining step by step what's actually required for the school-based assessment. And we base this on the syllabus. And we've added exemplar materials in that chapter, and we've put comments on the best practice and how to improve the writing and the presentation of the school-based assessment. What we haven't done is give a perfect example. It's a bit dangerous to do that anyway, because things change. Sometimes marking schemes change. The exam board will have their own examples. They'll probably have their own meetings so that they can explain what's required. And we didn't want to conflict with any of that. So we've given examples and then suggested, well, maybe these could be improved in this way or that way, leave this in, maybe expand on a particular region of the work, but we haven't given a perfect example. And there are activities in chapter 18 as well, which we've tried to focus on aspects of the school-based assessment. For example, for them to understand what is meant by open and closed questions, what is a survey, how do you present your results, what sorts of graphs would be suitable, bar charts or line graphs, and so on. So there are lots of bits of advice there, which I think you might find helpful. Throughout the book, we've got project skills and project topics. The skills develops into the suggestions for topics, because to start with, they need to know how to do things. And then, of course, well, what topics might they consider as an SBA? So we brought attention to some of those topics, and we've given ranges of options, but we don't give actual titles. We want students to feel free to develop their own ideas. They need to link their school-based assessment to a problem that relates to their region, as it jump. Sorry about that. I don't know how that happened. We haven't given actual titles, but we've hinted at the sort of areas that maybe they could use. And also we've given guidance on the areas of the school-based assessment as they go along, and to see how they might be able to gain marks. So here's an example of project skills. As you can see, it's about line graphs, and it follows on from another skill about how to make a pie chart or use bar charts. And we talk them through actually drawing a good line graph and how to go about it. Another one, presenting information to stimulate discussion. So we've made suggestions as to how they might present information. In this particular one, they could draw a poster, plan a poster. There are suggestions there, as you can see, about what information you might need to communicate. Make a list of it, put the details into a sensible order, decide on a heading and a plan, and so on. And the idea that posters give lots of information, but mustn't be boring, but they mustn't have too many words. And then we've given them something to practice. This is the food web chapter. So if they choose to do a food web, maybe they can make a poster of one and share it with the class. There's another idea there about deforestation. How to ask the embarrassing questions. We felt this was quite important when they're coming to do surveys. As we said, you can't go up to somebody and say, do you think you're too fat? And I've suggested you might upset the person, but of course they might actually get a punch on the nose if they're not too careful. So I think what you need to do is learn how to ask the questions in a scientific way. And we've suggested, of course, if you can get data, then you don't actually have to say to the person, do you think you're too fat, or why are you so thin? Actually get measurements from them and you can make your own decision about BMI and stuff like that. And a reminder here that actually one of the activities tells them, well, okay, you can calculate the BMI in a scientific way. I've just given one example of topics, but we've actually got quite a lot of suggestions. There's a topic on breathing rate. Why do young people start smoking? There's one on blood donation and attitudes to it. Investigations with breathing rate and pulse rate together. Changes in body temperature. Testing for sensitivity. Surveying opinions on reproductive issues and so on. Genetic testing, counselling, the impact of vector-borne diseases in the area, reasons for taking drugs, a whole range of topics. And what we've done is just give lots of questions and things at the beginning, and maybe remind them at the end of the topic that you should be able to write these up in a clear way, have detailed descriptions, state the research problem, decide on methods and so on, and just the things that they should think about when they're actually doing their school-based assessment. So here's the general layout of the book. It's just really reminding you of what I've just been talking about. A lot of the text is similar to the previous edition, although we may have reworded it and what we've tried to do as well is to lose very dense text from the book so that we've broken it up. You can see there about keywords, etc. There's no point in reading them all out again because this is just really a summary of what we've already heard. And another wonderful feature of Macmillan's provision is that they're preparing animations and extra help. And I understand that Rainer or Nicola is going to tell you about these. Perhaps you'd like to do that now?
Sure. So just to let everyone know, if you're familiar with the previous edition of this book, you will remember that there were activities on an interactive CD-ROM. For the 7th edition, which is the one that Niva's of course written, we have removed the CD-ROM, and for the interactivities, they are now available online. The activities are accessed by a code which is printed on the inside front cover, along with the details of the topics that are supported by the online content and instructions on how to access the material. As you can see from the list, the interactive online support covers 16 topics that have been selected from the CSEC syllabus. For each topic, there is an illustrative animation, plus true or false questions, drag and drop exercises, comprehension tests, word games, and multiple choice questions. All questions and activities give instant feedback on whether or not the answers are right or wrong. I'm just going to show you a quick snippet of one of the animations now.
Respiratory system and breathing. This topic covers the structure and function of the respiratory system, including the mechanism of breathing, tissue respiration, and after-tissue respiration. Air is drawn into the body through the nose. The inner wall of the nasal cavity is lined with fine hairs that trap dust particles. As the air passes through the nose, it is warmed and moistened before it enters the lungs. Air can also enter through the mouth, but the process of filtration is not so efficient. Air passes down the trachea, the lining of which has cilia. These are small hair-like projections that trap foreign particles and microorganisms in the mucous membrane.
So that was just an example of one of the animation videos, just to highlight some of the online features that we have. So I will pass it over to Niva now. I have mentioned in the chat box, if you do have any questions, now is the time to ask Niva any questions before we finish the session. while we wait, I think Niva has a few questions that have come up in previous webinars and previous questions around the title and the topics that she might be able to answer in the meantime.
Yes, sure. One of the things that I was asked in a recent conference was, do you have anything about COVID-19 in the book? Well, of course, it was all happening while we were writing. And so what we tried to do was to include it where possible. Obviously, it comes in viruses right at the start. In fact, one of the career suggestions was to become a virologist, and I pointed out how and the name escapes me for a moment, but one of our local scientists actually worked with viruses and looked for mutations, and so it was very much linked to the idea of what the scientists are having to do now with coronavirus. So we mentioned it there, and we managed to get up-to-date information as far as December 2020. So, for example, we got to the point that we knew 1.5 million people were had died across the world at that stage, and the numbers were still going up. And also it became relevant when we talked about pandemics, so that they could relate their own experiences to what a pandemic means. Another question that came up was, what are the exemplars for the school-based assessment? Well, we used two different ones. The first one was based on the fact is it safe to live near a rubbish dump, and based it on the fact that a student had noticed that her friend regularly had a cough because she lived near the local dump, whereas people who lived much further away didn't seem to have the same problems. And so it's a survey-based assessment, so that the questions were all related to, how far do you live from the dump? Do you have this symptom regularly? Do you cough regularly? Do you have headaches, or all sorts of things? And then we, having written the first draft, if you like, of that particular assessment, we then have, next to all the points, comments saying, well, this isn't actually relevant to this particular title, so you could take it out, or maybe you could develop this particular point, and that sort of thing. Next to the tables and charts, we've suggested things which are relevant and which are not, and what they should include. So to try and fine tune that. So in that particular case, we then gave the edited version as well, so they could see how it had been changed. The second one was a much shorter example, where students actually looked to see reaction rates and used an online test, such as the traffic lights one, because they'd noticed that if people were distracted, then their reaction rates were actually much slower. And by asking them to do the test when they were fully alert, and then to actually suddenly distract them by saying something out loud, which was the distraction, to see if that actually altered the rate of reaction. So they're two completely different ones, and something like the reaction rate one can be done quite quickly compared with obviously a survey one. But you would need to talk to the exam board to know which they consider the most acceptable. So again, these are examples, but not definitive ones. So you need to find out what's the most up-to-date information. So that was the SBA. I think I can see a question about accessing the online answers. I assume that will be arranged between schools and Macmillan, and you'll probably have the link sent to you. Some of the teachers were concerned about working from home and blended learning, And I think as a subject, this one is ideal for that, because you can actually guide them towards relevant resources online. You can do activities online with them. You don't just have to have a face-to-face conversation, if you like, and the normal sort of teachings that would be considered more lecture type if you're online talking to your class without any response, which is difficult, I know, in these times. But if you can plan activities for them to do, like, okay, go away and look at a particular video, and then we can talk about it and look at the results and chat about the significance of that. Then they can do that at home, and then you can come back and work in the classroom on what they've already learned. Are there any questions that have come through, Raina, before
I think you've answered some of the pre-planned questions that have come up before, and also a few people are asking about the availability in their region. So the first way you can do that is contacting your local bookstore, or you can just email us and we can let you know. And in terms of the online accessibility, as we said, there is an online access code within the book. So answers tend to be generated as soon as the activity is completed. But if you do have any other queries or concerns, do email us and we will do our best to answer your questions. So I think we will leave the session there for now, Niva. And just to say thank you so much to Niva for a fantastic session. And also she has been sent the book as of today. So it's really nice to be able to have the book in person, which is always great. And as always, if you have any questions or queries, do contact us, and we look forward to seeing you in an upcoming session soon. So take care for now, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.